Days of Moon.
All right, we are here with British ufologist Timothy Good, who has been this for over 5 decades and is one of the world's top ufologists, who actually recently just received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the UFO Truth magazine, or the world's top British ufologist. Congratulations, Mr. Good, and welcome to Third Phase of Moon.
Thank you very much.
You know, you have had years and years of experience, and as a matter of fact, your book has changed so many lives. It has actually caused people, several of your books, one in particular, Above Top Secret, has caused people to come forward. Captain Solace, when we interviewed him the first time, he said that the reason he came forward about the Malmstrom Air Force Base incident was because of your book, UFO Top Secret, and it wasn't until afterwards that he actually found out that it was a different incident that happened a week before. And I was wondering if we could start with that, because clearly you've been receiving real legitimate information that's been validated over the years. How did you come across that Malmstrom Air Force Base incident?
Heavens, I haven't a clue. I can't remember everything.
Well, that's okay.
I did publish details about it, but I can't recall who sent it to me offhand without referencing my book, with going to the references and things.
I don't blame you. You've had several books, and each of them has a lot of information. That's okay. This was, I believe, 26 years old, 1988. You published the book? Around there?
I think it was 1988 in the United States and 1987 in the United Kingdom.
There was a documentary, I believe it came out in 91, of the same name. Was that based on your book, or was that just a coincidence?
I would say it could have been a coincidence, but I don't know.
There were a few things in there, maybe if they ring a bell, I'll ring them to you. John Lear was talking about there being 37 levels above top secret. They talked about the Kalahari desert crash in 1989, I believe, in South Africa, or near South Africa.
Yes, I found that particular case. I know John Lear, and I respect him, and he's done a lot of very good research. But the Kalahari thing, I was not convinced by the principal source regarding that story from South Africa. But and I think I've stated as much in one of my books, at least.
You know, another thing you've also recently talked about, this again will come up when we go into your book, Earth, an Alien Enterprise, which is an outstanding book, by the way. You mentioned that the astronauts, we've been given technology since going back to the 50s, and apparently there was some race that was here that definitely didn't have the best interests in our hand. And Gordon Cooper made a remark that he was willing to, if the UN wasn't going to listen, he was going to fly one of those over there. And we hold Edgar Mitchell in very high regard. God bless him. We spoke to him. He told us a lot about his time in Roswell during high school when he flew over Area 51. But I get the feeling that he was holding back information. Do you think he knows as much as Gordon Cooper did? Was he possibly trained in some of this?
Gordon Cooper was definitely one of the first astronauts to fly an actual flying saucer, which probably had been given to us by certain extraterrestrials. We have had the technology since the mid-1950s, according to my information. And quite a number of the astronauts have been flying these craft for a very long time. And as I say, we have been given the technology. There's a chapter in my book called Amicizia, which means friendship in Italian, which references the fact that we were given from the mid-1950s not just the technology to build craft similar to theirs, but they actually have given us quite a number of their craft, and that applies to the United States as it does in Italy and quite a number of other countries. So we've had the craft since the mid-1950s, and we've had the technology since then.
Now, like you said, it was given to Italy, the U.S. Obviously, it wasn't
other
given
countries, quite a number of other countries. I don't know how many precisely, I don't know the details, but I imagine quite a number of the major countries have acquired this technology.
Do you think that these countries sort of have an alliance that they've all received the technology because they're working together, or that these races independently went to each of them and gave?
I don't know, but my information is that the reason we have been given this technology is quite simply because Earth is under threat, and there are those aliens who do not have our best interests at heart, and who apparently, according to my information, have a 100-year plan starting in the 1940s up to, I suppose, goodness knows what it would be, 3040, something like that? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe. No, sorry, I can't. Anyway, 100 years from 1940, 2040, I guess it was. Their plan is. These are the ones that are involved, apparently, in the hybridization process, which is a mixture of them and us. The purpose being so that they don't have to live underground all the time, because they can't exist in their normal state for any lengthy time on the surface of our Earth, and therefore they've created these huge underground bases, and they have developed hybrids. And the purpose is to take over our planet. And there is a serious threat from these beings. I can't give you up-to-date information, but all I know is it's been going on since the 1940s.
You brought up a very good point with this hybridization. We've been speaking to several abductees and several of the hypnotherapists, such as Barbara Lamb, Yvonne Smith, Dr. Jacobs, that deal with them. And it seems that over the years, when they were shown their hybrid children, they were told to love them, and these ETs were observing them. But over the last 10 to 15 years, a lot of these abductees were told they would go in a room in some craft where they would be shown the hybrids, but not just told to love them. This time they were shown ordinary Earth objects and told to show them how to operate them. Or if they go into a grocery store, what do they buy, as if to assimilate themselves with humans. Did your information reveal any of that? Because that seems to us that they are literally preparing for an invasion within, just being on this Earth without us knowing.
I wouldn't know. I wasn't given that specific information the way you described it, but there has been a situation, and it's ongoing as far as I know.
You have come across some beings that were definitely not from around here, and one incident that you had was where you recognized it and you told it in your mind to touch its nose and immediately reacted. Can you tell us about that?
Yes,
incident?
that was my second experience in the United States. My first one was in 1963, and I had 3 witnesses present, and this second one was in 1967 when I was in New York working with the London Symphony Orchestra, and I just one day decided I might send out some thoughts, telepathic thoughts, to see if there was anyone in the New York vicinity who might give me some confirmation, some proof. So I sent out a thought in my mind: if there are any of you guys in the New York area, come along and join me in the Park Sheraton Hotel, which I think was off 7th Avenue, not far from Carnegie Hall, where we were working. And I just sent out that thought, and within about half an hour, this man comes in, immaculately dressed, pale olive complexion, very pleasant looking, wavy fair hair. I would say about, 5'10", something like that, and immaculately dressed. And he looked at me, and he came and sat down some distance from me on the settee in the hotel lobby of the Park Sheraton. And so in my mind I said, okay, if you're the guy I'm looking for, take your right index finger and hold it to the right side of your nose. And immediately he did that, and he kept it there for quite some time. And then people say, well, why didn't you talk to him? Well, I didn't feel it was appropriate, and I hadn't asked for a conversation. I just wanted some proof, and I got the proof that I needed. It was only years later that I've actually communicated with one of these beings at least, and that was in Poland about 9 years ago.
Can you tell us about the Poland incident?
Yeah, this was I was actually attending a UFO conference, but I think it was either the night before or the night afterwards, I forget which. I was the guest of honor at a prestigious debating salon called Professor Dudek's Salon. And I was the guest, and there were about 80 people there, and it was the first time that the subject of UFOs had cropped up in Professor Dudek's salon. In Wrocław was the actual town where this took place. And I gave my presentation, and there were then questions and answers. And I'd been noticing all along a guy that was very similarly attired and similar complexion to the man I'd seen in New York in 1967, but he was different. He was definitely slimmer. And I can remember people have said to me, why don't you try and get some photographs of these guys? So I actually set about, as people came back from the interval, I had a small Minox camera with me, which was sort of convenient and not too ostentatious. And I took one picture of some of the people on the right side of the room from my aspect, and then from the middle. And then when I went to where this guy was sitting about to take a photograph, a voice came booming out of nowhere saying the speaker's not allowed to take photographs. And I apologized to whatever or whoever. I mean, I don't know where that voice came from, but I did not take the photograph of that guy. And then we fast forward to the end of the complete presentation. It started at 7. I was only speaking for 35 minutes, showing slides and so forth. And it was open to debate by all the people that were there. As I say, there were about 80 people there. And the last person to speak was this guy I'd had my eye on. And he stood up, and his presentation was entitled Earth's Future in Space. And I thought, gosh, this is going to be interesting. And I was absolutely fascinated by what he said. And I don't know exactly how long he spoke for. I didn't time it. But he seemed to make a point of coming in my direction when the whole debate had finished at about 11 o'clock. And I approached him. I gave him my business card. I went to shake his hand. There was a sort of very vague handshake, hardly any grip to it at all. And he just looked into my eyes without blinking. He was about 5'10", I guess, maybe a little bit shorter, I'm not sure. But I said to him, I think you have a great deal of knowledge. Now, eventually he left. I spoke to him, that's about all I said to him. He said absolutely nothing to me, but he looked very intently at it with his unblinking eyes at me. And the interesting thing is that I remembered everything that he'd said during the presentation when he was the last person to speak about Earth's future in space. So fast forward just about 5 minutes after the whole people were leaving, I was joining friends who were putting me up in a lovely place in a castle which had been converted into a hotel. So I was with about 6, 7, 8 people, something like that, and they were aware of they didn't really have any idea who this chap might be. They certainly hadn't had any thoughts that I had that this guy was from elsewhere. But suddenly, I couldn't remember a thing he'd actually said during his presentation, and I can't remember how long it was, Earth's Future in Space, this last presentation. Neither could anybody else that I was with. There were no recordings. The speaker is supposed by contract to get a video recording of the whole event. I was supposed to get photographs as well. There was a professional photographer there. I could get nothing. I could get no response, even from Professor Dudek, to try and give me all the information, because I'm quite sure that a recording would have been made, as they normally were at these prestigious debates. I could get absolutely nothing. And by the time I left that salon, and none of us could remember what he'd actually said. I said, what was that guy talking about? And they said, "Oh yes, it was Earth's future in space." And I said, "Yeah. What did he say?" None of us could remember, and there is no official record of it. So make of that what you will.
It sounds to me as if he almost wanted to intentionally erase the memory of everybody, as if maybe he said something too startling. Obviously, we could only speculate on this, as you said, make of this as you will. But what do you personally think?
Because I remember, I mean, I can no longer remember anything, but I certainly remember and recalled everything he'd said during that presentation. So did the people there, but none of us afterwards could remember anything. I think that at some point in the future, whatever he said will come back, and we'll be able to recall everything that was said by him.
Now, seeing this human-looking, possibly extraterrestrial, or if possibly hybrid, do you think?
No, not at all. No, I would say a highly advanced form of humankind.
There have been several human-looking advanced extraterrestrials, right? That have visited.
There are probably thousands of them around. I mean, they're just thousands of years ahead of us on the evolutionary scale, and are responsible for our evolution.
And you mentioned quite a few of these cases in your book. Of course, the Adamski case, the Pierre Monet case, and did the Dvorak case? Did they also see human-looking?
Very much, very, very similar. Absolutely, yes. Very, very human types who spoke all languages on Earth, and were very, very friendly indeed. And they were concerned about pollution on Earth, even way back in the 1932, when they first landed, this group, seen by these two boys.
This is one thing I love about this case in particular. If you were talking about this contact in the 60s or 70s, it may have not received the right. It would have been more taboo, such as the Space Brother movement, versus now when people are actually looking at this as, wow, they were worried about us destroying it, because I don't think anybody living on Earth as a human being from Earth even cared about our environment in 1932, yet these beings seem to, like you mentioned, we're possibly looking at the DDT that we were looking in our insecticide.
Yes, it was just before actually DDT was used, but they did have various types of sprays which performed the same function as DDT did later on.
This goes to show that they have a clearly vested interest in Earth. Some people even claim that we're like an alien ant farm to them. Do you think that's the case?
Sorry, an alien?
Like an ant farm, where we're just a big laboratory for them that they created to watch us.
It's possible.
Another case, again, that we just brought up real quick, Adamski. One thing that I didn't know until you brought it up was that he had a U.S. government ordnance card, which allowed him...
An ordnance pass, which gave him access to all military bases throughout the world. And he liaised with very high-ranking officials and with a number of presidents. Kennedy was one of them, and there were various others. And he certainly had 2 meetings with Pope John the 23rd and 2 meetings with Pope Pius, an earlier pope. And he was very well connected at the Vatican and had private meetings with those popes who were well aware of the situation.
A lot of its speculation is that the Vatican has been holding on to secrets of this for decades, if not centuries. And clearly, if Adamski was speaking to these 2 popes, obviously they didn't tell us about it. Do you think that the Vatican has been holding this knowledge for...
Yes, and I think they've had regular meetings with guys from elsewhere.
Same thing with the presidents, right? Do you think there have been any other meetings outside of the Eisenhower
and Kennedy, I'm aware of. I'm not sure of others, but I would keep a very open mind. It's quite possible that other presidents have had contact.
Now, a case that you brought up earlier in this interview, also in your book, I hope I don't mispronounce it because you said it the proper way, Amachitsia?
Amachitsia.
That one. there were some amazingly clear photographs, and one of them happened during some sort of, was it a conference or some sort of gathering, and this object appeared that was very, very clear in the photograph. It's the classic saucer. Can you tell us that incident and what that whole case was about?
Well, it's a very, very complicated case. I don't know really how to go. I mean, it was a saga really, comprising a large group of hand-picked people from many countries throughout the world. And for 40 years they liaised with a group of aliens and sometimes traveled in their spacecraft, some of which were lent to us and others which were actually given to us. As I mentioned earlier, the object of the exercise being to counter a serious threat posed to Earth by other groups of aliens. And therefore we were using the craft, and I had the great privilege of going to Italy on 2 occasions, both with my girlfriend, who speaks much better Italian than I do, and we met Professor Stefano Breccia, great guy, a former pilot, a computer expert, and he had flown in these craft on at least 1 occasion. And he had taken a lot of photographs, and I have reproduced some of his close-up photographs of the craft. They're quite small, about 12 feet in diameter at the most. And he was absolutely genuine. I mean, if anyone was genuine in this subject, I would say he was one of the most genuine witnesses I've met in my life, no question about it. And my girlfriend, who's not particularly interested in the subject, but similarly highly impressed by his phenomenal knowledge and honesty. So, you know, we have these craft. I've no idea whether we still do have some of them, but I wouldn't be at all surprised. But eventually, around about 1978, the Amicizia group, amicizia meaning friendship in Italian, apparently left. Because there was some conflict situation allegedly going on in one of the Adriatic Sea, where they had huge underground and undersea bases. I think the largest base they had was about 193 miles in length, and you might think, you know, they must take centuries to build these things. They can be built instantaneously and closed down. All the matter, whatever matter is underground, can be all put back, you know, within a very, very short space of time. Such is their phenomenal technology. But since they're, you know, several thousand years ahead of us, it's not really surprising.
That's an astonishing number, close to 200-mile long base. But at the same time, it's not that astonishing when you hear other people who seem to have a genuine case, and they talk about these ships that are several hundred miles in length, and yet
who says they're several hundred miles in length?
There was one abductee, Stan Romanek, and he talked about being taken to one crypt.
I must say I'm rather suspicious, and always have been suspicious of Romanek's claims. So it doesn't mean that he would say, you know, or that, you know, I mean, I'm quite sure some of them are very large, miles in length, that's for sure, but I wouldn't say hundreds of miles in length. That would be counterproductive, I would imagine.
Nonetheless, with the bases, to be 200 miles wide or big, 200 square miles, I don't know if it was long, but that's reasonable to hold a civilization such as them below us. What other bases can you tell us about where they might be located on this Earth?
Oh heavens! I mean, they're constantly changing them. I know they had them under Pine Gap in Australia at one time. There's a huge base, or there was a huge base to the west of Hawaii. I don't know, 100 or so miles, couple of hundred miles maybe to the west of Hawaii, which was used by some of those the hybridizing species, and I've got a great deal of information about that in my book. And indeed, from a government, United States government source who's helped me with a lot of data about the aliens and what they're up to, I've learned that there are huge underground bases and the different types of aliens, and there is a serious conflict situation. Furthermore, I've gone into extreme anatomical detail as it's been given to me, and I think that I've put that in the last chapter, the final chapter. I think it's chapter 17 of my book. Great amount of detail as exactly how these creatures are configured, and all their anatomical details and precise information thereof.
It's a scary thought to know that we have different factions with different intentions living on Earth simultaneously, but at the same time, when you think about how large the universe is and how many different types of species have been visiting us, it's really not that far-fetched at all. And one of the cases you actually brought up in your book again too was about the real little green men, and I thought that was a very astounding case when you showed the drawing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. This was back in the 1940s, when a Professor Johannes, who was a highly respected author and painter, found himself paralyzed when a flying saucer complete with two small green humanoids landed nearby him when he was trekking in the Italian Alps, and eventually he recovered, and these beings came quite close to him, and eventually they got back in their craft and took off, and he was finally able to recover his movement and went back to his hotel. And there have been a lot of stories like that, but that was the first. We talk about little green men, but in fact they're extremely rare, and that was one of the rare cases. They've only been reported on a very, very few occasions, which is interesting.
There are obviously several different species, and you've described several over the years. Can you, for the listeners and viewers who haven't quite read as much into your work that I wish they hope they have, or will now after this interview, can you describe some of the different races aside from the very common grays and the human-looking ones we discussed as well?
Well, there are many that are very, very similar to us. Many different types of species.
Do you think that they were that the different types of species, the reason why they're all bipedals, 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, is because they're a variation of the same race, but yet mixed in with the local race?
I think the humanoid is the standard type. A trunk, 2 arms, a head, 2 arms, 2 legs, and so forth. And again, there's a great deal of anatomical detail which is given in my book about these. Well, I've gone from one extreme, the aliens who are most similar to us and who say that they helped develop us genetically from thousands and thousands of years ago, to those strange beings, some of whom seem quite committed to trying to reproduce hybrids on this planet, which is slightly disturbing, if that's true. I don't know if it is true, but and they vary. Some of the so-called hybrid types vary. So do the small aliens. There are many different types of small aliens. I just mentioned Professor Johannes and the small 2 green aliens with large, very large round eyes. Many other types of beings have been seen.
And now I'm also going to deviate slightly from your book, because you've been vindicated with your research over the years, especially with crash and retrievals. I remember reading about different crash and retrievals that you were talking about in the early 90s, when it was really taboo because it was only Roswell and Kecksburg, and if you thought anything else out of that, then you were really considered too freaky. But now in the last few years, we hear of dozens of them, or one of them being the 1942 Cape Girardeau incident. Girardeau. Can you describe a couple different other crash and retrievals?
Oh my goodness. Offhand?
Yes.
I can't. I think the incident in New Mexico regarding a 100-foot disc which was recovered by the military. It was first seen by locals, but it came down. I'm trying to think of the name of the town in New Mexico. It was a small town. I've been out there myself. I've been to the area where the craft actually came down, but it was 100 feet in diameter. And eventually, several of the locals saw the craft and didn't know what it was. And eventually, the military was called, and they came in. And it took them several days before they were able. They suddenly touched something on the craft, and they were able to get inside, where there were these, I think, something like 10 or 12 deceased small aliens who'd just suffered completely from a crack in the window, a hole in the window. So they just completely lost consciousness and died. And so the body and bodies, all the bodies, I think there were 14 of them, and the craft were taken away by the U.S. military.
Does the name Aztec ring a bell? Do you think that was the name of the town?
Aztec, yes, that is the one. The Aztec, I think, if I recall correctly.
50, so it was 3 years after the Roswell, so after they've already had experience of dealing with crash retrievals. Was there a crash and retrieval where they actually had to bury the craft because it was so large and build a base around it? Do you know?
I've heard of stories like that. I have heard of stories like that.
It just seems the more we find out, the further you go down this rabbit hole, it seems that what used to sound strange years ago is not so strange anymore. And that's the scary part with this.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most startling revelation you've uncovered in the 56 years of your work?
Oh, I'd be hard-pressed to answer that one.
Okay.
I think my own encounters were quite instructive, that's for sure. But there's so many cases that I've looked into. I just don't know. I wouldn't know where to start. There's been so much evidence. Multiple sightings, as you know, have been taking place all over the United States and many other countries all over the planet.
Now, we could only speculate on what the future can bring, and we could hope that things such as the citizen hearing had an impact. I remember when we had Senator Gravel on, he came on as an open-minded skeptic, just like all the committee did, and you could see the transformation after the 5 days of testimony. And I would wish that the same example would go throughout the world in possibly a UN setting, but at the same time I fear that disclosure will never happen. Sadly, that I believe that may possibly be the case, but you know much more. And again, this is only speculation. What do you think is going to happen with this topic in general?
I have no idea.
I hope for our sake we are eventually told the truth. Maybe it'll come by each person individually having an incident rather than a full disclosure.
That's a good point. I think, so many, I would say, thousands of people on our planet have had encounters, and many hundreds, perhaps more, have been taken up in craft since, well, I would say, since Ezekiel and Elijah. I mean, there are certainly very impressive stories in the Bible, if they're true. I mean, one has to allow for mistranslations and all sorts of things, but I mean, this has been going on. There are all sorts of Greek legends about the gods that came down to earth. There's tons of information. A lot of sightings were written up in Latin by the Romans of their encounters, many hundreds of years ago. There's an awful lot that's been going on.
It seems like in all our history, it's just scattered throughout. No matter where you look, you find references, whether it be in paintings, like you said, in the Bible, or Sanskrit text.
Yeah.
Everything. It seems like we've never been alone to begin with.
Yeah.
Do you think our ancestors clearly knew what our origins were, since they always talked about wisdom be given by the star people, and that this was suppressed over the last few centuries, or that they just the knowledge was kind of lost over the years?
It's quite possible that hundreds of years go by without not much happening. Though I think there's always something happening somewhere on this planet relating to the subject. But what you say is quite possible.
Nonetheless, we've touched on some of the important cases in your book. We touched on Monet. We touched on the friendship. I don't want to mispronounce the Dwarshaw case, which if I can go back to real quick, one thing that I really liked about that case, aside from the fact that it started in 1932, was that it had a connection to George Bush. Can you tell the people about that?
Well, all I know is that he knew Bush and his wife quite well over quite a long. That's Bush Jr., by the way. That's all I know, and I have a copy of a letter from Bush to Leo Dvorak.
We find that fascinating because George Bush, to us, we think is in the know in the sense because of his father.
Yeah.
Being director of the CIA, and I just think that gave him unprecedented access.
Was a very strong Republican. So and he just over the years he got to know Bush, and they discussed aspects of the subject. That's what he told me. So he knew him. He must have known him quite well.
I would think so. Like when you showed in one of your lectures when you received that Lifetime Achievement Award, the actual was it a letter on George Bush's letterhead written to Leo? I thought that was really astounding. Yes. Nonetheless, your book Earth and Alien Enterprise is an excellent read, and for all the listeners and viewers out there, we hope they all read it and catch up with all of Timothy's
I'd like to mention a couple of things. I mean, I think you know that Ben Rich was one of the most highly informed personnel. I mean, he helped develop all the stealth technology, as you know. And in 1993, at the University of California in Los Angeles, he was an alumnus of the Engineering Association there. And what he said, which was recorded, I believe, and it's been confirmed by two friends of mine who were present at this thing back in 1993. This is what he said. We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. And that was in 1993. There are leaks of information, and there's another one. For example, in December 2012, I mean, this is a matter of record. I think I've still got the video because it was strongly denounced as a misunderstanding. But in December 2012, Russian Prime Minister, former President Dmitry Medvedev, inadvertently revealed some sensitive information to a journalist following a television interview, apparently unaware that his microphone was still on. And he was asked if the president is handed secret files on aliens by a female journalist, and Medvedev replied as follows: along with the briefcase with nuclear codes, the president, Putin, is given a special top-secret folder which in its entirety contains information about aliens who have visited our planet. Along with this, you are given a report of the absolutely secret special service that exercises control over aliens on the territory of our country. I will not tell you how many of them are among us because it may cause panic. So I think that's quite intriguing, and it is a matter of record, even though it was denounced by the Tory press, the Conservative press over in the United Kingdom in the Daily Telegraph, but they just thought that he was making a big joke. Well, he wasn't, because there's film of him, and his face was looking very serious at the time.
I actually remember that incident, and like you said, sadly, the mainstream news, or not even the mainstream, didn't cover it. I remember the alternative news media that did cover it did exactly what you said, and they played it off as a joke. But when you looked at his face, there was no joking manner whatsoever, or in his voice. That alone could be taken as a form of to use as disclosure, and yet the skeptics still dismiss it, which is a sad thing. And the same thing with Ben Rich. That was someone who absolutely would be in the know, because, like you said, Yes, he was a president of Skunk Works, and he started the SR-71, right? The U-2 stealth bomber, the
Yep.
B-2 and the F-117. We've been worried is that this is a private corporation, and over the years, what we fear is that the technology, some of this technology has been given to them. That way they don't have to answer to the people. If things are in a private corporation that does military contracts for the government, they don't have any reason to answer to the people under Freedom of Information Acts or anything else like that. Do you think over the years a lot of this technology has gone into such private corporations?
Yes, definitely. No question about it. All in black budgets.
Just like Ben Rich said, and sadly it is locked up in there. Do you think we'll ever be able to crack that, just doing what we're doing, this continuing to talk about this openly and spreading the word?
I think so. I think a lot more information will come out. I think most people in government haven't the faintest idea what's going on. It's mostly in a military cover-up.
You're right. It absolutely has been, and it still continues to go on to this day. Even Hitler possibly had something, right? Was there possibly a crash in 1936?
I haven't. They were definitely experimenting with disc-shaped craft. That much I know. As to how far exactly they got, I am not so certain. But there's been a lot of research done on that.
And the fact that they were testing that technology in the 30s and early 40s, well earlier before we even got to passing the speed of sound conventionally, is just a thought, because it just proves that what our mainstream uses, such as a Boeing jet flying 400, 500, 600 miles an hour, rather than using something that could literally traverse the Earth in matters of seconds. We need to close that gap, and I hope it comes out for the right.
I think it's quite possible that, you see, in 1933, a craft landed outside Milan. It crash-landed and was recovered. More, I don't know to what extent the damage was, but it was recovered. So it's quite possible the Germans eventually got access to that craft, or the Italians shared the information with the Germans, because the Germans were certainly early on the scene regarding studying the subject. There's no question about that.
And of course, there was the Italian-German connection with Mussolini and Hitler. And I think that very well could have tied in together, and that's maybe why they thought they could take over the world, because they kind of had the technology.
Yes. I don't know whether I just mentioned very briefly that I've, thanks to information given to me by Bill Steinman, a very fine researcher who I spent time with in California many years ago, William Steinman, he's a great researcher. He actually made inquiries, and he discovered that Henry Kissinger was in charge since the 1940s, the early 1940s, of the UFO problem. And there's a lot of information. This was confirmed by the guy who headed the Office of Special Studies, Dr. Eric Wang, and his wife confirmed this on the phone, recorded conversation with Bill Steinman.
I would definitely think Kissinger would be involved in this, because if he was involved with Nixon was vice president to Eisenhower when the meeting and the early days of MJ-12, so I think that fits perfectly well. Sadly, he's not talking publicly on this, but maybe one day we could actually, maybe your friend can get him out to talk, or maybe Kissinger will just come forward. But that's what we hope for. Nonetheless, it's been an honor speaking with you about your book, about your work, and about everything. Is there anything else you want to tell the viewers of Third Phase of the Moon and the listeners of Revolution Radio?
I can't think. I just encourage people to study this subject objectively when it's possible. It's such a very complicated subject, many different aspects of it, and we just have to study as much as we can, and to establish communications with people who are really in the know where possible, because a lot of these people aren't allowed to talk, as you're well aware. But I think as time goes by, I mean, look at Gordon Cooper. He's come forward and said he's actually flown a real flying saucer, and he offered to land it outside the United Nations building, and that was confirmed by a friend of mine who knew Gordon Cooper very well. I did know Cooper, but very sadly, we talked over the phone, I think, on one occasion, and exchanged correspondence. But I very much regret never meeting him in person, and I had greatest respect for him.
We are actually very happy that he came forward and talked, because he was one of the highest, I guess, person you could say in the United States, short of a president or anything. Also, again, with Gordon Cooper, sadly, when he passed away, the only person left to talk about him now that knew him on that level of being an astronaut was.
I'd just like to add. I'd just like to add that there are two space programs. One is above top secret, and the other one is the one that we've been talking about, like mentioning names of astronauts that we know who've done this and done that, been on the moon and back. But I can tell you there has been United States Air Force Space Command has been in control. They have a base in the middle of the Pacific Ocean where they've for decades have been, according to my information, have been launching stuff to the moon back and forth. I don't know much more than that, but the sort of Challenger shuttles and things like that, that's not the real space program. There is a real space program, and it's quite well advanced, according to my information, to the extent that we're probably certainly on the moon already. Some of your guys anyway, and almost certainly on Mars as well. That such is a technology that we have.
We are in total agreement with you there. We believe that NASA is sort of the cover space program for us to lead us astray.
Absolutely.
And during the citizen hearing, as a matter of fact, one of the witnesses was talking about a secret space program, and right then Senator Gravel went on to confirm it. One thing I wanted to add and actually ask you is, some people have claimed that over the years, when we've sent up a conventional spacecraft, we would actually send in a military astronaut as well. Do you know if that was the case when they sent one with NASA, or was that just always in the secret space program?
I don't know, but I think rather the latter, what you say, that it's part of the secret space program that's going on, which we just don't hear about.
Well, nonetheless, like you said in your first book, or was it your first book, Above Top Secret, there's so much information out there that is classified that we clearly are not being told of, and we're learning more throughout the years, and you have done an astounding job of uncovering this information. And as I mentioned earlier in the interview, at least one person that I've spoken to has directly come forward because of what you've written. And we'd like to thank you for all ufology, for the impact that you've had. And it has been a pleasure and an honor to speak with you. Let me plug in your website as well for everybody out there, timothygood.co.uk, and all of your books are available on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Anything else, Mr. Good?
No, just thank you very much for the interview, and I hope it's productive, stimulates interest in those who may be extremely skeptical, sometimes rightly, about this vast subject.
Third base of moon.